So I still think it's important to understand the connection between belonging, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that's why I included this slide. I want to draw your attention to the inclusion to the lower left corner with the three circles, the series of circles and the separation, integration, and inclusion. So obviously separation, we know that there's been a long history of different groups being um, pushed out to the margins in our society and our US culture and not being included when it comes to social life, political life, education, higher education in particular, even in religious organizations. And so that's that separation. We're very familiar with what that looks like. At some point, we move toward integration, and that is bringing those people who have been, those groups that have been historically marginalized into the fold. However, you see from that graphic that even in integration, there's still separation in the integration. If you look at that graphic where the dots of color are still gathered together in one spot versus true inclusion where you might imagine that those dots of color are fitting in where they feel most comfortable. They're fitting in where they have alliances and allegiances to the other gray dots, and they're not just a segregated group that happens to be included in the in circle. And then, of course, belonging is uh, ensuring, as we'll get to in the next slide, the definition, ensuring that people that we all feel supported, valued, safe, and secure to be ourselves. And I like to say not only to be ourselves, but to be our authentic selves. To show up, I talk a lot about the environment on campus. So, you know, it's a great privilege to work on a college campus, and uh, excuse me, our students, I think, help me stay in a youthful mindset and stay open to new ideas and possibilities. Um, I often say I want our campus to be a place where people can show up and be their authentic selves, where we walk across the campus, down the breezeway, and when we encounter someone who is very different from us, either in the way that they look, the way they talk, the way they walk, the way they just their overall presence, that our first instinct is curiosity rather than fear. I think there's a tendency, just because we're all humans, we live on this planet, that when we encounter someone who is very different from us in many ways, if it's not outright fear, it might be caution, it might be a little hesitation, you know, until I figure out who is this person and you know what's going on here. But I think there's an opportunity for us to train ourselves to be more open and to be more curious about people who are different from us rather than cautious or fearful. So this whole notion of belonging for me is to reinforce the importance of um, um, creating an environment and sustaining an environment where it is expected that people will show up in being their authentic selves, and they will contribute to the diversity of our environment. That, you know, we're not all supposed to be alike. If you look around just in the people that's in this room right now, we're all different in some ways. We have some similarities, we have lots of differences, and that is the norm. So what we do with those differences is a different story. Um, so context. So we have to think about the context. So it's not enough, like I said from that previous slide, just to bring people into the circle, right? If you remember those dots on that lower left graphic, to bring people in, that's not enough. Really have them integrated and to be included as their authentic selves, reinforcing the fact that they have something unique to offer, and our world would not be the same without them. I'm reminded of it's a film that I watched years ago, and I wish I could remember the name of it. I tried to find it earlier. This was about a college student, so a young Black man, athlete, who was recruited by a predominantly white college and several states away. I wish I could remember the details, but he was recruited to go to college as an athlete, and um, so they brought him in, and again, so he was included to some degree. Um, but the context of his life, the context of his presence there was not really appreciated by other students, by the faculty. And so this young man who was admitted to college on a basketball scholarship had virtually no social life. He didn't have enough money to his bills were his school, his tuition and books were paid, but he didn't have money for social engagements and that kind of thing. And then he began dating a white woman, and that caused some other challenges. And so this young man wound up being very depressed, even though, from the outside looking in, people might say, oh my gosh, you got this great opportunity to go to college on this scholarship. But when he arrived there, he was very lonely and isolated, even though this university had welcomed him into the college. They didn't create the environment to help him develop a sense of belonging. He didn't feel like he belonged. In fact, he didn't, and he was actually told that. And then there were, some incidents where, people challenged his academic and intellectual ability, and certainly said to him that he didn't belong there. So I give that example to say that we can welcome people into our space. We can create an environment where there's room for people who think differently from us, who might show up in the world different from us. But that's only one step in the process. We have to go further to really create an environment where people know that they are valued and they feel a sense of belonging and value and worth. So context, it's important that we recognize there's a long history of intentional exclusion of different groups and people in our country. There's also a long history of unintentional exclusion. So you might have heard of microaggressions in the past, and that is that unintentional acts of marginalization or bias, or even discrimination that, oftentimes when it happens and someone calls your attention to it, you go, oh my gosh, I did not mean, that was not my intention. And I think that's important to recognize that a lot of bias incidents are really not intentional. You think you might be doing a good thing, or you just simply are not paying attention, or maybe not thinking more broadly enough. So there's a long history of that, and we just need to acknowledge that those dynamics exist. Those patterns show up in many ways in everyday life when we think about um, um, laws in our country, when we think about experiences that people have in employment, housing, and public accommodations. Um, those patterns of intentional and unintentional exclusion still exist in many ways. And while there's been progress, I mean, we can probably pause here and create a whole list of events and things that are clear progress toward greater inclusion and belonging. They often lead to backlash. When we see major progress, we also experience a pushback or backlash from, I'll just say, the institution that would hold on to those old ways of doing things, namely keeping certain people or certain groups out on the margins of society rather than embracing the great diversity that is our country, and pulling people in. So obviously there's still a lot of work to do. There are opportunities for us to acknowledge the legacy, the history and the legacy of the many isms in our world. We could probably go around the room now and just name, one or two isms that you're aware of, that you've been personally impacted by, that you've read about and studied about. And those things exist in our structures, in our systems. and their policy, their procedures, their program systems that where these issues show up. And so there are opportunities for us to address them through these reckonings that I talk about, policy, procedural, and programmatic reckonings. It's important for those of us who have been doing this work. It's important that leadership mirrors the demographic profile of any community or our country. Again, there's still opportunities for that. We still have a long way to go. It's important when it comes to belonging, while not always necessary. When you see someone who looks like you, or someone who represents an identity or values that you share, it's important that you see them in key decision-making positions. So that's it's important that we see that, and it's not just what I recognize for myself, but for other people, for everyone, especially those people that I might have some disagreements with. It's important that they see people in leadership that look like and talk like and think like them as well. I obviously am a believer in equal access and upward mobility for everybody. I think our power structure should be transparent and flexible and nimble and keep up with the ever-changing culture. Every generation is different. Our culture is not static. It is very dynamic and continues to evolve. And I think we need to evolve with it. So now the benefits of creating environments that foster belonging. And I have a couple of education-specific environment examples in here, in part because that's the environment that I work in, and I talk a lot about this. So creating an increased sense of belonging, it contributes to retention. And think about, so for me, retention, I automatically think of students and helping them persist toward graduation and beyond. But think about your environments. Think about, again, whether it's a professional environment or a social environment, your neighborhood. How might you contribute to increasing a sense of belonging for people in your environment so that you retain them? So either you retain them in the neighborhood, you retain them in your church, you retain them in school, you retain them in employment settings. What do you or can you do, and what are leaders doing in those environments to support ongoing connection and positive outcomes, positive mental and emotional health outcomes? When people when they feel like they belong, they are valued and respected, they have more positive mental and emotional health outcomes, they stay engaged, they stay connected, and they tend to retain in whatever environment it is. Again, I talk a lot about students because I work in education. And so the next bullet speaks directly to that. The students who feel like they belong, they get better grades, they do better, they persist. Even if they have difficulties or challenges, and they're more likely to reach out for help. We have a lot of support resources for students on campus, but they have to access them, right? So students who really feel like they belong in this case at UNF, and they feel like they belong on this campus and that people value them, they're more likely to reach out to them to get help and to stay engaged and to use the resources that'll help them move and progress. And those who don't feel that sense of belonging, they don't stay. Many students they come in not so sure that if they skip down to the third bullet or the fourth bullet, those from underrepresented or marginalized identity groups, they're more likely to show up on day one wondering, is this place really safe for me? Do I belong here? Unless the environment has been very intentional about making sure that people know that they have a place here, then those questions persist. And one of the things that is real easy, is low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, to convey the message that an environment is open and supports and embraces diversity and inclusion and belonging, is what your promotional materials look like. It's one of the first things I do every time I look at our website, when I look at any kind of promotional materials. I automatically am drawn to the photos in those materials. And I want to know, do these photos represent the diversity that is on our campus? We have diversity on our campuses. We're still considered a predominantly white institution, but we do have a diverse environment. And so when I look at photos on our website or on promotional materials, one of the first things I ask myself is does this represent the actual community on our campus, or is there an opportunity for us to be more reflective of the people around us? And creating demographic diversity alone does not solve the problem. So I just gave an example of that young college student who went on a basketball scholarship to college. And oh, I forgot to say, I don't know if this sounds familiar to anyone, but I think if I remember correctly, that young man wound up killing himself. He had a long history of depression, and he could not make it, could not be successful given the challenges that he was facing. So just by simply adding demographic diversity or visual diversity does not capture this notion, this idea of belonging. And it's a felt sense. It is a reinforcement of differing identities and ways of thinking and ways of being in the world. And then the COVID-19 pandemic, I think it really highlighted and elevated the significance and the urgency of addressing belonging. So just in an instant, we all were relegated to our homes. We all had to disconnect in many ways from people. I had to find other ways of connecting. Zoom obviously became a whole lot more important in our lives during COVID-19. And we talk a lot about the impact of loneliness and isolation because all of us were, even if we had family in our homes, we were still isolated from our usual day-to-day lived experiences. And that just highlighted this need that we all have to connect with each other. And so a couple of things got reinforced that we admitted and realized that college students don't simply go to college to get knowledge. Employees don't simply are not only going to work to earn money, that there's a desire and a need to connect with others. Now, I personally believe that we are all connected. Not everybody believes this. There may be some of you who don't believe that. Personally, I believe that we are all connected, and that actually helps me to be more thoughtful and compassionate to people, especially those who are different from me, because I see them as part of me. I, if I push anyone out to the margins, if I am intentional or unintentionally biased toward people, that to me is the equivalent of cutting my nose off to spite my face. I still suffer. Again, not everybody believes that. I happen to believe it, and it works for me to believe that we are all one entity, one body, one soul, if you will. And I don't want to harm myself. And because I think we're all connected, I'm not likely to harm you. And that is physical harm, emotional harm, mental harm, harm through my vote, and to create laws that might work against other people. I'm very thoughtful and intentional about using my vote, using my voice to create a greater sense of inclusion and belonging for us all. So environments that foster belonging and oh, I see a comment here in the chat, and from Lance, okay, so using the Trump campaign uses and purchases photos of Black people to show that they're inclusive. Well, sorry, I didn't mean to. Let's go back one. Well, right. So there's that performative, those performative activities of throwing up photos of Black people, making sure that women are in the picture, or people who have differing abilities. are in stock photos and those kind of things. And I think while that could have some positive impacts if people see themselves and they think, okay, well, that works for me. I think they will quickly learn if it's a very superficial activity and it's not genuine, they'll learn that truly they don't belong, even if they see themselves, even if they see someone that looks like them on a photo or in a picture, on a poster. Um, what I'm talking about is a real, true valuing of people and including them at the decision-making table, being thoughtful and mindful of different needs of different people in different communities. And so that is not easily conveyed by just simply putting different people in a photo or on a poster. So in essence, I think we can see through those tactics. Environments that create a sense of belonging are environments where self-reflection is the norm, where people are comfortable. Well, I don't know if I should use the word comfortable because self-reflection is not always comfortable, but they may be in the habit of examining their own thought processes, their own biases. We all have some degree of unconscious bias, and that doesn't mean that we're bad people. It just means that we grew up in an environment and we live in an environment where a bias, intentional and unintentional, still exists, and it's almost impossible for us not to be impacted by it. The good news is that with awareness and increasing self-knowledge and insight, we can have have a handle on our own biases and work with ourselves to address them as they show up in our lives. Again, it doesn't mean that we're bad people. It means that we're human. So the idea of self-reflection is not to completely eliminate, not necessarily to completely eliminate biases. That's great if you could do it, but to acknowledge them when they show up, to address them and learn from them and grow from them, to be transparent um, and sharing with others that you're in community with, of how you're learning and growing through these experiences. So unconscious bias, examining yourself, self-reflection is the norm. What's called the dialectic, whether that's in the classroom, the boardroom, on the street, on social media, that this idea that we can have multiple ideas existing in one time and space, that we don't all have to, drink the same Kool-Aid. We don't all have to be on the same page, but we can be in the same space and we can be civil toward one another and truly respect one another. I think that's not I think, but certainly since the shooting, the gunman who shot Donald Trump on Friday or Saturday, we've been hearing a lot of conversation about, oh, we have to tone down this political rhetoric. And um, I do believe that um, the political rhetoric in particular, the negativity, the mudslinging, and all of the stuff that tends to go on in political campaigns has a profound impact on all of us, and it looks different for all of us. So some people can, fall into depression or anxiety or worry about all of this stuff. Others get motivated in their own way to do something about their passions. And I don't know the shooter in this case, but I wonder how much of the political rhetoric that's out in our environment, how much that motivate him toward this action. So this dialectic where we are able to tolerate differing opinions and different views in one time and in space, we hope is more stimulating and life enhancing rather than um, traumatizing and defensive. A lot of people experience this as um, traumatizing and they become defensive because they feel attacked or they don't or they don't and they don't feel valued. So I think the challenge is to be honest and sincere and true about where you are and what you believe and where you and um, you know what your thoughts are, but also to acknowledge and support differing opinions and differing views. And that doesn't have to be a complete, it doesn't have to be a negative experience. Again, it can be stimulating, it can be life enhancing. It's important to think about our oversight bodies. So in higher education, we have a governing system. I work, it's a state university, so we have in Tallahassee, we have a governing body that oversees all the state universities, and they tell us what to do in many cases. Um, so we have to find a balance in doing, what we all know is that are called speaking truth to power, staying true to our values toward equity and justice, while at the same time understanding that our governing bodies, have a certain degree of power, and we have a responsibility to cooperate and to work with them. That's not always easy. That was very difficult this last year and a half, where um, our governing bodies were promoting things about our DEI initiatives and infrastructure that were simply not true. And we recognize this as political theater, and but given the dynamic and given the power structures, there was only so much that we could do, and so we absolutely had to comply with especially when the law passed, we had to comply. And we received a lot of negativity. We received a lot of backlash from our own people internally from the institution, who wondered, why are you complying with different aspects of the whole process and then ultimately complying with the law? And so the administration received a lot of criticism, again, from internal people internal to the institution, as well as for people from the outside. And that, we have to, accept that, and we try to, be as transparent as possible and explain our decisions and the rationale behind our decisions. And that was to keep our institution safe and to not increase vulnerability that could lead to a hostile takeover that we saw with one of our sister institutions earlier in the year. It could lead to defunding our institution if we were to violate the law, and just a whole host of problems. And again, not everybody in our environment understood that. So our task is not only to cooperate with governing bodies, but to understand this very interesting dynamic between free speech, advocacy, activism, cancel culture, which is huge. It's important to anticipate the backlash that often follows a lot of progressive change. And so we want to be intentional in our response rather than just reacting to things. And again, that's not easy. That is not easy to do. So I'm pausing for a second here because I'm looking at a couple of comments. Lance, did you want to chime in here? You have a few comments in the chat. I see Window has included a comment opposed to science.
I'll wait for you to finish.
Okay, all right. So in fact, I'm almost done. I think there's only a couple more slides here, and then we can get to the dialogue. So I did include some specific to education. And I do a talk in our new faculty orientation on creating um, inclusive learning spaces. And so I just threw a couple of slides in there from that presentation as some suggestions, in addition to the pieces that I just mentioned, other ways that when I'm talking to faculty members about creating classrooms that are welcoming, where students feel a sense of belonging. Again, the issue of representation, and we can do that through case studies. In my classes, I use a lot of case studies, and I'm very intentional about the demographic descriptions of the people in those case studies, of their lived experiences. And so we're not just getting a bunch of case studies of the same type of person or type of communities or type of families. Excuse me. And that automatically speaks to people when they can see themselves represented in these classroom environments. The professor has a lot of power, to be honest, and if they use their powers for good, they can model kindness and empathy, civility and understanding. They can be the exemplar for building trust and facilitating connection and interconnectedness. One of the things that I do on day one in a class is I offer students options and choices, especially when it comes to the syllabus. I have laid out things, assignments and due dates and assessments and all that stuff, but I make sure that there are things that are negotiable. There are some things that are not negotiable, and there are things that are negotiable. So one of the first things I want to do is to make sure students know that this is a co-learning experience. They have something to contribute and offer. I have something to contribute and offer, that we can work on this together. I do have responsibilities that they don't have, and vice versa. But if they can negotiate, say, a due date on an assignment, or an assignment altogether, or something along those lines, then chances are they've just increased their investment in the course, and so we have much potential for better outcomes. I don't use the grades to try to capture everything. Um, so for instance, and this gets a lot of attention when I have this conversation with the new faculty orientation. People will say, and you might, this may be familiar with you, and I don't know if any of you are teachers in the room, but um, it's typical for students to get, marked down for turning an assignment in late. So they take off points for turning an assignment in late. So I don't do that. I think mastery of content is one thing, and I want to assess that. My learning assessments are about the mastery of content and processes. I have a separate um, opportunity to assess students' professionalism, and that includes showing up on time, turning things in on time, being involved in conversations and discussion, being involved in group projects, and all of those things. And so I don't want to conflate and confuse grading on mastery of content with professional presence and engagement. And so I have what's called an engagement in course grade at the end of the semester, where the students rate themselves on their level of professionalism, showing, did I show up? Did I participate? Did I turn things in on time? All those things. And they know that I reserve the right to change that grade. Whatever they assess themselves at, I give them a rubric, and however they assess themselves, I reserve the right to change that. I have the final say. Now, I have to tell you, they are much harder on themselves than I ever am. But you know what? I always go with what they say. So if they don't give themselves full points, I'm like, okay, not a problem. I probably would have given you more points, but this is the way you've assessed yourself. So they are usually way harder on themselves than I ever would be. Moving on, universal design is important. You know, I think it's important that our classroom, that our spaces are, whether it's work, classroom, or whatever, is designed to accommodate the greatest number, diversity of people. So we tend to think, when we use the term universal design, we tend to think, making sure our spaces are accessible to people with different abilities, and that they're welcoming, again, in terms of images and other aspects of the culture of any space that would signal to a person that you are welcome, you belong here. And then positionality. So again, here I'm talking about a professor in a classroom, but it could be you at work. It could be you in other environments. Who are you? And what do you bring to the learning and to the environment? What do you bring in your own history, your own culture, your own whatever your cultural identity markers are, your own experiences from growing up through professional environments and so on and so forth. We bring all of that history and experience with us wherever we go. How aware are you of your positionality? How aware are you of how you show up in the world, and how that may be experienced by other people, how they might be interpreting how you show up in the world? Again, we're not responsible for the way people think necessarily, um, but I do want to maintain an awareness of how I show up and how people might be experiencing me. And then ultimately, what am I learning? I believe that as long as I I'm on the planet, as long as I'm living and breathing, there's opportunity for growth and evolution. And so I want to stay in learning mode. And these are just some examples from faculty members who contributed to this conversation about how they create a welcoming environment. Um, they start out by letting people know that you're going to experience some things that you might be uncomfortable with, but it's important that you stick with it. Um, encourage students to reflect on their own position in society and their power and how they show up in the world and what that means. Um, and I talked about mastery of content earlier, and allowing students some flexibility in how they demonstrate that is important. We all have, we're different learner. They're different learning styles, and um, I often get criticized for not uh, doing enough lecturing, believe it or not. I was surprised when I got that feedback from students. I do a lot of discussion and activities and small group work. And I heard from students a while back that they want more lectures from me. And I thought, oh, that's weird. But oh well, I have to attend to that too, because that is a learning style that is important to address. Having a warm and caring presence, and making sure that people know that they can approach you. So think about when we think about this idea of inclusion and belonging, who's typically left out of this conversation? Which groups, which issues, which dynamics? We've been talking a lot more about people with varying abilities or differing abilities, unique abilities we talk about. And so there's more conversation around that, although I think there's still a lot more work to do to make sure our spaces are accessible. I met with a student last year. She reached out to me in my role as Chief Diversity Officer, who is a student with a larger body. And she was concerned that most of our classrooms have desks that don't accommodate her larger body comfortably. There are those desks with the attached the chairs with the attached table, the desk, and they're very uncomfortable. So, most people don't think about that. They just think, oh, these are desks and, it's a classroom and so on and so forth. So we've been working on not only on having more physically accommodating spaces, but also thinking about um, how we move forward in designing all of our spaces, not just the classrooms, but all of our spaces to be more accommodating. I think of people who might have a mental health diagnosis of some sort, um, or people who don't have a diagnosis, but may be experiencing some challenges. And when I think about and the environments that many environments don't support help seeking, particularly for mental health. I read recently where construction workers have a high rate of suicide, and I had no clue. I'm a mental health professional, and I had no clue that construction workers have a high rate of suicide, given the pressure, especially in recent years. Of there's so much building going on all over our country. Everywhere you look, there's construction going on and deadlines to meet, and there's pressure on the construction company to deliver and to not have cost overruns and meet deadlines. And so that pressure is rolling down to the construction workers, and they feel that. And just like in the military and in professional sports and in some other environments, for construction workers, I learned it's not okay to not be okay. And so there are some professions, there's some environments where the stigma is much stronger around help seeking than others. And so I think we absolutely need to ensure that people who are dealing with those issues are welcome, that they belong, that they're valued just as much as people who are not dealing with those issues. And we probably could talk more, and maybe we can, in the discussion part, talk more about what other communities, what other groups tend to be left out. And I think this is it. This is the last slide. Yes. So who does this well? Who does this inclusion and creating a sense of belonging well, in your opinion? And what opportunities are there for the communities that you're a part of? think about your, again, I think about whether you are in a work professional environment, school, or if you're a student and you in a school environment, your neighborhood, your church, if you're involved in that, other civic groups, this group of the First Coast Free Thought Society. What are the opportunities just within this group with the 15 people that are 16 of us who are on this call today? What are the opportunities just within this group to create a greater sense of belonging and connectedness? So that is it. That's all I got to say. Now I want to hear from you, and I'm going to stop sharing. I can always come
Oh,
back.
all right. Well, thank you, Richmond. I appreciate you figuring out how to unshare your screen and not leaving it up to me because I'm not the technical guru here. But I appreciate everything you just said. So let's open it up for a discussion. I know Lance had a couple of remarks in the chat section, but let's open it up for anybody who has a comment or a question at this moment in time. If you do, show your emoji hand raise, and if not, I've got a couple of questions.
Oh,
Uh,
good.
um, so why don't I just start? Richmond, you said there's a difference between responding and reacting. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Can you expound on that a little bit? Reaction to me is like when you get hit in the knee by a doctor and it's involuntary. And responding shows some thought. How do
Right.
you how do you describe the
I
difference?
would agree, Ken, I would agree with you 100%. It's and responding is more intentional, and it's not. It doesn't have to be automatic. In many cases, it's not because you want to spend some time giving some thought to what has occurred, what has been said, what has happened, and what that means. And so we go through this meaning process of meaning making before we contribute our thought or our response. Reaction is like you just said, when the doctor hits your knee, it's automatic. Your knee is so interesting how that happens. And I think that that can come from our programming. I think as we grow, we learn what it means to be good, what it means to be bad, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and all these things. And I like to think of it as we get these images and we carry them around in a big sea bag or knapsack or whatever. And so what we learn as we're growing up and through different experiences of what it means to be good, bad, um, a man, a woman, and smart, blah, blah, blah. As we move through life and we encounter situations that we go, oh, this calls for being smart. Let me go look at my bag. I have an image of that. And all this happens so quickly that it feels automatic. And so that's a reaction that we subconsciously are working on those images that we've stored. It's kind of like our programming for our computer, right? The programming of your computer, it will keep operating the same operating system unless you change it, right? And when you get those upgrade notices, if you don't upgrade, it'll keep running the same program. We could be running a program from Windows 10, which was a gazillion years ago. As long as your hardware is working, it'll keep running the program. Well, we have so many more advances in software since then. So if we don't upgrade our images in our programming, then that reaction, we'll find ourselves reacting a lot, and it'll feel like we can't even control it.
Mhm.
That's where the introspection and personal growth comes into effect, where we're constantly looking inward and saying, what is actually in that bag that I created a long time ago as I was growing up and learning about how to live and how to be, how to exist in the world? And which images do I need to change? Which ones do I just need to throw out altogether? Which ones do I just need to upgrade and maybe put a new frame around so the image itself is still good, but maybe I just need to fix it up a little bit differently? And so being very intentional in that regard and looking in enables us to be more responsive and very intentional in our response versus just simply reacting like when you get your knee hit by the mallet.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense to me. How do we deal, not and you specifically, but how do we deal with the loners, the lone wolves, the individuals who are children, and you deal with teaching young people. They're a little bit older, maybe because they're in college, but you deal with still young people, and the loners start at an early age often.
Yeah.
How do the loners get to feel like they want to belong? Where is that line?
Well, I think the desire to belong is very natural. I don't think people don't want to belong. I think the problem is they encounter environments where they are expressly excluded. So if we go back to the shooter from Friday, Saturday, the guy who shot Donald Trump, um, just from the few things I've read, it's a typical story of someone who was bullied as a young person. Some of his student colleagues have said that he was bullied based on his appearance. He has a slightly different appearance than what we might consider typical. And we've heard this time and time and time again, particularly from people who have facilitated these school shootings or mass shootings, that they have felt isolated. And I'm not making excuses. I don't think harming anyone, shooting anyone, I don't care what their beliefs are, is appropriate. I think that is it's highly inappropriate. It's sad. It's tragic. Um, and so I'm not endorsing someone taking those actions just because they've been bullied. But I do understand the math. So I like to say that our whole world is math. People talk a lot about, oh, I hate math. I don't like math. Why do I have to use this? I'm never going to use math again. Well, we use math every single day, all day long. The whole world is math. So think about this kid, and we don't know a ton about him just yet, but this young person, I should say, he's not a kid. This young man who, what we do know was he was at least bullied. We don't know much else about his home life and what that experience was like, because it's probably compounded. There's probably several layers of issues that he might have been trying to work through. But to get back to your question, it is not so much that he did not want to belong. He didn't see a space. He didn't feel welcome. No one really intentionally wrapped their arms around him and says, you belong here with us. Come sit at our table for lunch. This article I was scanning through earlier said that he often was alone at lunchtime. And so it sounds like either no one or there weren't enough people reaching out to him to say, why don't you join us? Why don't you come sit with us? Why don't you come hang out with us? Why don't you do these kinds of things? Maybe some of that was happening, but it sounds like it wasn't happening a lot. So I think when these kind of things happen, it's not so much with the loners that you mentioned, it's not so much that they don't want to. It's certainly initially, maybe after they've had some experiences where they've been marginalized and they felt unwelcome, then they develop a preference for being alone. But personally, I don't believe that that is innate. I think we all want to connect. We all want to be connected to others.
Hmm. And that's where the trouble is with the loners, is that they have a hard time connecting. They may have been invited to the table, and
Maybe.
the table then decided, oh, we don't like you any longer,
Mhm.
because the loner did not know how to react while the loner was at the table. And then we have a back and forth, and then the loner says, "Oh, this isn't working for me," even though the loner might have been invited to the table at one point. Let's go to Candace, she, her. I guess those are the pronouns. Candace, you have a
Candace,
Thanks.
is that your middle and last name?
that's right.
Hopefully you all know why I put she, her there.
Yes.
Um, Starting from inclusion, all that, that I learned at the Unitarian Universalist Church
Oh,
that we were
great.
working on. Yeah, we were working on that. And they have a national and local program on uh, addressing bias and microtransactions. A very good program. I didn't get to do all of it. But anyway, I wanted to start with, like you touched on, I read an article about the statistics of how minorities continue to drop out at much higher rates in institutes of higher learning
Hmm.
because even though they're there, maybe scholarship and supported, the cultural aspects, especially for indigenous or
Hmm.
Native American, whatever term you want to use, was so high they just didn't feel like they fit in. So that's an not personal thing. And I wanted to touch. So thank you for bringing it up
Right.
about my personal. I hate to compare myself to like other minorities since I'm a woman,
That's okay.
but I'm, a white woman who did have privilege. But my college experience, they kind of and I was a shy loner. By the way, it becomes a habit. So
Mm,
yeah, and you read all the time that we are lonely, and we do get lonely. But it also becomes a habit to both think of myself as outside other people and how different I am from everybody. I look for the differences before I look for similarities. That's my habit.
okay. Mm,
And being naturally cautious is more these days than ever. But so that's one answer, is it becomes a habit.
thank you.
And I'm trying even now to break out of it more. But in college, they basically, and this would be early 80s, kind of totally forgot about me and didn't make sure that I attended the meetings that are mandatory, that they're supposed to make sure that when you're a
Oh,
freshman and following up and all that. And I was afraid to go to them, but they really should have reached out to me. It would have helped me a whole lot because I came from a very distorted background perceptually. And then finally, I was about due to graduate, so like 6 weeks or something before
mhm.
I was due to graduate. I finally met with the dean, and even then, he wasn't clear. I still have no idea what he was getting at. You know, there was a last minute thing. There's all this stuff they really now I should have said to me, and I'm still not quite sure what he was getting at, what he thought I should do. I said I wanted to be a social worker and do counseling, and he just kept asking over and over again if that's what I wanted to do, instead of saying, "Oh, your grades indicate you could do more." Or, one teacher thinks you'd be good at research, which is probably the case. He just kept repeating that question. So and not being clear of giving me feedback and reviewing what's going on. I still think it was pretty horrible, and hopefully it didn't do it to many students. So I'm rambling on, but so that was my a little perspective on inclusivity.
Right.
Um, but what's also getting me is I compare what radical right conservatives, violent right conservatives, and the power structure in the particular republic, what they're willing to do, kill people and then some to maintain their power. And here
Mhm.
we're talking about making touchy feely, making people feel good, which I think is very important. And I've told you, from a personal perspective, it's important to me, both as a recipient and to act that way. And I do act that way. But on the other side, the thing that's causing this pushback, the pushback is, suppressing votes and killing people and
Mhm.
inciting young people to shoot somebody.
Sure.
So I'm seeing this really big disconnect that partly on the left, we're into all these all these issues of softness from the environment. We have hundreds of issues, and the right is just willing to half destroy the world to get
Mhm.
what they want for power. So that's my rambling things. But if you could address that.
Thank you, Candace. Wow. So this last point that you're making about the different perspectives on from these political camps, I believe that being intentional, being inclusive, pitching the biggest tent we can is strategic and important for our longevity, and it contributes to the preservation of democracy. Those acts that you described that are coming from the other political camps are really undermining, destroying democracy. And so while you described it, the approach as touchy feely, but I think that while you may experience it that way, it is very intentional and scientifically supported that when we include people, the individuals and groups have better outcomes. Our society as a whole is better. I mean, if you just look at the business case for diversity, and business leaders get this for the most part, even if they don't in their heart of hearts really truly believe in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, they understand how it's good for business. It's good for the bottom line. So they're very intentional in that way. Again, they may not be coming from, oh, this is the right thing to do. They may be coming from, oh, this is going to help me in my profit margin. And either way, as long as there's a commitment, I think that's something positive to work with. So I still think being more inclusive is the right thing to do. And I think it's important that we make the connection between being inclusive, creating the sense of belonging, and other outcomes, positive outcomes, economic, social, political, and other outcomes. I totally agree with your experience that you shared with us about people who, in this case, Kim mentioned as described as loners. After being isolated for some time, I think people don't always know how to interact with others, even when they are welcome. Like you said, when they are welcome to the table, it might be very awkward and very uncomfortable because they haven't been included historically. And so, that can create difficulty with them staying connected in these communities where they actually have been included. And I think there was one other point you made between those 2 points. I apologize for missing that.
Well, I
Candace?
think you've covered the main thing. And
Okay.
thank you for, partly I bring this out because the people who respond usually really open my eyes more to seeing, and if we can be much more successful in the inclusivity thing, it gives me hope that we can bring back the world back together. It's not just this country. I just
Absolutely.
hope we do it well enough and fast enough to overcome the opposite pressure. So thank you for addressing that.
Okay, absolutely. And thank you. I appreciate your contributions.
Well, Richmond, one of the things you said was, how do you show up in the world? How do you show up in the world? And that was kind of an open-ended question, but you're also talking about teaching students as how they should show up in the world. But then you have students who are very obstinate and don't want to be told how they should show up in the world. And then you have other students who are yearning for somebody to teach them how to show up in the world. How do you navigate that?
Well, I don't tell students how they should show up in the world. I create an environment that allows them to reflect on how they show up in the world. So it's not my place to tell them how to do that. It's my place to create an environment where they can do some self-reflection, even in the midst of a classroom, through assignments, through other things that they have to do that's related to a course. So I think that's a huge distinction, that is not me telling them. It is me creating this space. It's normalizing self-reflection. It's demonstrating how even I, as a professor, do this in my own personal development and growth. And I have this some degree of transparency right in front of the classroom, in front of everybody. And so I'm setting an example of how to, but not dictating what the details of that should look like.
Right. So you give them options. And this is where sometimes I think the loners have trouble, because the loners may want to be told this is a better way,
Right.
as opposed to leaving it up to themselves. I think Socrates, is he the one who is credited with saying an unexamined life is not worth
I
living?
was living.
Do you often use that quote?
I actually do not. I need to use that more often. So thank you for that.
Well,
I love that
it's
quote.
kind of dangerous in some, because
Well,
when you put it in not worth living, and I'm not examining my life, that there's a problem there.
Well, you're right about that. I wouldn't want to encourage anyone to not want to live because they haven't
Right.
done in their estimation, a good job of self-examination. So you're right. I probably want to be cautious about how and when I use that.
Right.
But I
Lance.
absolutely am committed to self-examination. But go ahead.
Okay, Lance,
Oh, Lance.
Lance, you're muted.
Yeah, I enjoyed your talk, Richmond, and I certainly appreciate your attitude. But it reminds me of why I'm so happy not to live in that state any longer. And the fact that I wouldn't, I taught in university classrooms everywhere but UNF for 14, and I wouldn't have lasted 10 minutes under the fascists. In fact, I remember years ago, I was doing my orientation for Intro to Sociology at Flagler. And like I always do, I say we're going to study the sociology of religion in one of our segments, but we're not going to argue about which religion is right or wrong. We're just going to look at the facts and what religion does for society. Anyways, the next day I get called into the dean's office. And he says, I understand you insulted God yesterday in your classroom. And I just laughed. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, a girl in your class her father is friends with the president of the university, and she complained that yesterday you insulted God when I said that we weren't going to talk about which religion is better, and I laughed at the time, and the dean laughed at the time, and the whole rest of the class, the whole rest of the semester, everything I said, I looked at this girl to see if I had insulted God. And but today, that would have cost me my job. I would have been fired immediately. And
Wow.
so I don't know how you could possibly teach sociology in Florida today. I don't know how. You're not allowed to talk about historic racism. You're not allowed to talk about what really happened in the Civil War. You can't talk about gay people. That was one of my segments was gender. You can't talk about women. I mean, I had a section of my class talking about women's rights and things going on with women. So I don't know how when I'm looking for online teaching jobs, when I see that it's in Florida, I don't apply.
I
There's no,
understand that.
I can't teach sociology in Florida. How do you teach reality to people who won't let you learn reality? And when I invited you to talk, that was one of the issues that I really wanted to hear is how do you not talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in a society as diverse as the United States? I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Richmond, Lance offered a lot of stuff there. You care?
He did, as he always does. So, so for one, I will say that there aren't as many limitations on teaching sociology as you might think. So they did make some changes to an Intro to Sociology course just in the recent Board of Governors legislative session. But most of the restrictions from this legislation on the in-classroom stuff is restrictions on the required general education requirements. So there's certain general education requirements that most students take in their first couple of years. Excuse me. Some of those courses are required, and then they have categories of required courses, but students they have options. They can choose from, say, 5 courses in natural sciences or something like that. And so they don't have to choose a particular one. When all this stuff was unfolding about the legislation, initially it was draconian. You may think what we wound up with is draconian, but it was worse to begin with. And so there was just an all-out ban on everything DEI related until they realized, we have accreditation we have to attend to that most accrediting bodies require some kind of DEI infrastructure. We have there's some federal mandates and things that we have to attend to. So it kept changing. And so where we landed with the academic restrictions is that they're primarily on the required gen ed courses. And their rationale is that Well, if a student wants to study sociology and get a degree in sociology, they're going to take courses like race, gender, and class, sex and politics, and racism in America, blah, 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 those kind of things. They say, well, that's not required. You don't have to get a degree in sociology, so you can go ahead and take those courses. So we still teach those courses. But because they're not in the required general education, then they see that as students just, you have a choice. And so you're choosing that if they, meaning the people who made the law, they still think that that content is harmful and actually is in and of itself discriminatory. That's their belief. And so they say, well, if you choose that, that's up to you. You don't have to choose that major. You don't have to take those courses. So that's where it lies. But I think one of the things that the legislation did was to create this a chilling effect. So we have many of our faculty members, even though they're maybe not teaching general education courses, they're still hesitant to teach that same material, especially in the ways that they've done it in the past, because they're concerned that there's going to be a backlash through annual evaluations or somebody might record them. The students can now record faculty members without our permission, which and nobody likes that. And so so we may have people recording the faculty have concerns about all that stuff. So even though the legislation doesn't prohibit them from teaching those courses in the outside of gen ed, there could be other problems and other issues. So there's absolutely has been a chilling effect and a fear and intimidation, and it's just been complicated because now we're having to navigate and negotiate all those issues on top of everything else. So I hear you, Lance. I get it, and it's a good thing that you have options, so you don't have to choose Florida, right?
It's not good for Florida
It
kids.
is not. It's horrible for Florida. It's absolutely horrible for Florida.
So it's okay if I want to teach about white supremacy in the classroom, I can do that, but I can't teach about the truth of racism.
No, you can teach about the truth of racism, just not in gen ed courses, not in the required gen ed courses.
Isn't Intro to Sociology a required class?
They removed that. They took that. Yep, they sure did. In the last session, they took it out. Yep. So, but again, but to your point, Lance, many faculty members, even though they have the ability to teach the same stuff, they're concerned, they're afraid, and so it's having, one of the intended effects was just this to create more fear and confusion, and so.
All right.
Yeah, I taught a class at JU on genocide, and today I suppose I'd have to have a section in there about how the Nazis were the good guys to balance my class,
You might, if you don't, you could get reported, but that doesn't mean that anything will come of that, but you never know.
All right, Wendell, you're up. You got a question, a comment? Wendell, you're muted. And then we'll go to Candace. Wendell. There you go, Wendell.
Wendell might be enjoying that nice graphic of his photo, that nice.
Wendell, are you there? All right, Wendell, we'll come back to you, Wendell. We're going to come back to you. Let's go to Candace. Wendell, we're coming back to you after Candace.
Yeah, this will be shorter. Do you like I was trying to keep track, and I lived for a while in Florida, of the law and what they were able to teach and not able to teach. And sounds like I didn't keep track completely. But do you foresee those restrictions being lifted, or how long do you think it'll take for maybe to work its way through the courts and finally get ruled that they can't do that, and or the tide to change? Do you have an idea when some of this might stop or end?
Yeah, that's a good and tough question. Certainly nothing is going to happen before while the current governor is still in office. And because they wrote it into law, it makes it even more challenging for the governor's successor, if they so desire, to change it. Now they can, but they also have to work through a whole nother process of changing a law. I don't know that the governor that succeeds DeSantis will have an appetite for that. And then, of course, you got to take a look at the Florida legislature at that time and see, is it still the legislature that passed this law that gave the governor, a blank check on this, or has that body shifted and changed in terms of how it looks and how it thinks? So it's certainly possible that it could be reversed, but chances are that that is a heavy lift and may take a while and take a lot of people working to undo it. Again, it can be undone, as we know, but because it's now a law, it's going to take a lot more to undo it. So I'm personally not all that hopeful that it's going to happen anytime soon. I do believe that the way change works, the pendulum always swings back the other way. And so, I know you've heard that the only thing we can count on is change. That's the one thing we can absolutely count on, that things will change. So we don't know when, and we don't know how, and whether it's going to change in increments or be a big sweeping move. But I do believe there will be some shifting away from this anti-DEI, anti-inclusion rhetoric, and to more people and especially more elected officials and people in decision-making positions will understand and see the benefit of an inclusion and approach that fosters a greater sense of belonging, and how that actually helps this entire country. And it's not just about individuals and certain groups, it's about all of us.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Wendell, let's try again, Wendell, and see if it works.
Breaker 1 2. Breaker 1 2.
Okay.
We hear you. We hear you.
We got you, Wendell. We
Cool.
got you.
Thank you. Okay, cool. Thanks. Yes. Thank you for having me once again. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Wynn. So for me personally, okay, bumbling around on the planet, learning that no baby is born with any knowledge, and the social construct usually comes before the science, and knowing that we're individuals all hurt because of all the subhuman labels and whatever it is. So when I interact with my fellow human beings on the planet and they ask me, so where are you from? And I tell them I'm a human being. And I try to explain that, the social construct says we're white, black, green, blue, half something on your grandmother's side. And that is totally incorrect. And now the paradigm shift, because usually they've even accused me of being condescending, saying I'm using big words. And I'm like, I wasn't born knowing these words. They're not in my brain. And, it's like you can learn this stuff too if you question everything, reverse engineer it all, and then you still have a choice to say, do I still stay in that social construct, or do I switch over to this new information that I've been taught and see what happens? And that's what I do. I encourage, I invite, I ask people to start thinking logically so we could all decipher the truth. You'll see your tribe is the human tribe. We have cosmetic differences because of gene pool isolation and environmental adaptation. But if only we could get that spark of that logical thought process. And I try to give them analogies like basketball. You may not be able to play at, Michael Jordan's level, but you'll still be able to, dribble some, might be 20%, hitting a basket, but you'll get the gist of it. And hopefully that'll, have that, we'll have that critical mass, and then all this insanity would cease, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Wendell.
You care to respond, Richmond, in any way?
No, I agree. I like the thoughts that Wendell is expressing.
All right. Then let's ask Fred. Fred, you're up. Fred looks like he's walking around the planet.
Yep.
I love that.
Walking with my dog, and he's wanting to go one way, and I'm trying to go the other way. But I was thinking about well, I'm lately been reading a biography of Frederick Douglass
Hmm.
and about the problems he had even after he escaped slavery, even with the abolitionist movement. He had
Right.
difficulties, like his break with the garrison and the feud between them that lasted for a few years. So I actually think it's Harry Beecher Stowe that
Mm.
got them to
The,
um,
hmm.
calm it down a bit. As I'm
Hmm.
at that part of the biography right now, but I was thinking about the all the changes they're trying to put in place, and it took a massive war to undo slavery in this country, but then another century to undo Jim Crow laws, and even the racism within the northern states that took a long time to deal with.
Hmm.
And I think some of the changes that you're talking about with schools and the school board, that's going to take not only enough people voting to put the current ultra conservative party out of power, but also decades to change the makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Oh my
Because
gosh.
the current Supreme Court may just say, "Hey, that's fine with us. Keep doing it," rather
Hmm.
than because we think, well, the Supreme Court is going to be objective and so forth. We know that's not the case in the current makeup of the Supreme Court because they're human beings. They have their own biases and so forth. So they pretend to be objective, but I don't think they have been over the last couple of decades with the current makeup.
Yeah,
And
I don't even know that they pretend to be objective. I don't think they have to at this stage. They don't even have to pretend.
yeah, they're doing a very bad job of pretending that they are. But
Exactly. Exactly. I agree.
All
Oh,
right.
and like the last this is on Trump on the it's like I've read an article in the New York Review of Books about that being the worst decision since the Dred Scott decision.
hmm.
And there have been quite a
Hmm.
few bad ones in between, but that does pose a problem for us.
Exactly. Hmm. Thank you.
So you're welcome. And
We're
enjoy
getting.
your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred. Any further comments on Fred's remarks, Rich?
No, 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 we're good. Uh-huh.
All right, cool. We're getting ready to wind this up a little bit. Before we wind it up, I do have a few remarks, and I have another question for Richmond. But let's go back to Candace. Oh, she had her hand up, and then she took it.
Oh, well, I'll next. Um, Shoot, it was about the Supreme Court, and I was so angry that one of the first things that Biden didn't do was pack the Supreme Court, or try to pack the Supreme Court when he got elected. And does anybody have any input as to why he didn't do that then, and we wouldn't have nearly as much going on now as we've had this
Couldn't get it through.
horrible result?
He couldn't get it approved by the Senate. You need a
Oh,
super majority.
To add
oh,
more justices, you mean, Candace?
sorry, say again.
You were saying why didn't Biden add more than the 9?
Right,
Yeah,
increase
like so
more,
Lance is saying
but
that
that's why.
yeah,
Okay.
he couldn't get it past the Supreme Court. I mean the
I always miss details like that. But thank you for explaining it.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that the president doesn't have a whole lot of unilateral power.
He
Uh,
will.
oh God.
In the Fourth Reich, he will. And the Fourth Reich begins soon.
Oh goodness.
Richmond, how many professors that you've worked with for years have decided to retire rather than dealing with the Nazis?
I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I do know that some faculty members have left the university and they cited that this is one of their reasons. We don't know. We can come up. There is a number of how many faculty members have left since all of this started. What we don't know for sure is how much this legislation impacted their decisions, what other variables are present, and that they were considering in their decision to leave. And for those that I know for a fact this had an impact, for those people who have been very vocal about the impact that all this had on them, they are very clear that this was the number one issue for them. there's always and it has been here in Florida and at UNF in particular, an issue of pay being, not competitive with the other schools. So that's always been a concern and why people leave. So it's just it's hard to get at that information if people don't share explicitly that their decision to leave is related to this.
What about the student population? Is there a lower number of Florida kids deciding to go to school in Florida and more kids going out of state?
We will know later in probably more like late August, early September after the drop ad period when the students come back in for fall. Now, we are also at the same time working on increasing our enrollment as part of our strategic plan to increase enrollment by 2028. We're currently at about 17,000 students, and the goal is to increase to 25,000 by 2028. So we are likely going to see an increase in enrollment no matter what. And we're not relying simply on the first time in college students. We're including transfers and graduate students and along with the first time in college students. And so there's a whole mix of types of students that we are pursuing and to
Yeah, you're gonna have to appeal to the Hitler Youth.
to come to Florida. Well, so you know what
That's what's going to happen is there's going to be a Hitler Youth movement very soon. Yeah.
Well, and the students that would maybe have gone to some of the more conservative colleges outside of the state, they might be attracted to here. There are a lot of students who are avoiding Florida. And then there are going to be some students who, because of their situation or circumstances, they have to stay here in Florida and they go to college. But
Money.
we want to make sure that we're there for them. And we want to be there for everybody. Certainly those people who don't feel like they belong and don't feel like they're connected, in part because of this and maybe some other reasons. But I do know that many, students, faculty, other staff members have decided to look elsewhere for their work experiences or their college experiences. I think we're most people believe that we're certainly going to experience a brain drain. And so we might not even really see the true impact of that for another couple of years, to be honest.
It seems to me that the only winners might be the historically Black colleges. If I were a kid in Florida, I would go to a historically Black college.
I know, me too. So HBCUs have risen in popularity, particularly among Black students. And
I'll bet the white student population has increased.
Them too. That's right. There are plenty of white students at HBCUs. And I know my niece, I have one niece who's in college at an HBCU in Florida, and I have another, her younger sister is planning to go to an HBCU in North Carolina. And I talked to both of them about coming to UNF, and they were like, Uncle Richmond, we just can't do it. And I said, okay, well, consider graduate school. How about graduate school? Maybe after you've had this HBCU experience, maybe you might consider it for graduate school. And then both my nieces says, well, we'll talk about that later. So I don't think it's going to happen.
All right. Well, great. I appreciate everybody's comments and your questions. I know we're getting ready to wind this down a little bit. I do want to say a couple of things before we close out, and then I have another question for you, Richmond. I just want everybody to know that we don't have any meeting in August. We take the month of August off, but in September we're going to have a vernal equinox party where we meet in person. We have food and drinks and all of that, and it should be fun. That place will be determined in the next few weeks, I assume, and we'll put that out in all of our methods of communicating with people. Check our website. It'll definitely be on our website. It'll be on our meetup page. And then a couple of the meetings that we're going to have toward the end of the year, we're going to have a physicist who's going to talk to us about physics. We're going to get into the scientific realm of things and why is physics so important. And then we're going to watch a film called by Rob Reiner about Christian nationalism. called God and Country,
Mhm.
and the rise of Christian nationalism, and how they've seemed to have seized control of much of our federal government and local government, especially in Florida. So look forward to that. Now, Richmond, you said earlier that the students, in terms of you let them kind of grade themselves and let them kind of review themselves. And you said that they are harder on themselves than you are.
Yes.
What is that? Why do you think they're harder on themselves?
That's a good question. It might be they're trying to anticipate what my thinking is, and they're um, maybe trying to, think like the professor might be thinking. And so that's one guess. Um,
I
uh,
think some of it is simply honesty, right?
and
They know
honesty, okay.
they know the amount of effort they put in and didn't put in.
Uh-huh.
And I remember many times saying, you're being too hard on yourself. You put in as much effort as anyone else, but they were critical, and I appreciated that. Unlike you, I always gave them more if they did that.
Oh, did you?
I didn't just accept what they said because I thought they were too hard on themselves.
Yeah, yeah. From their perspective, maybe this is more of a self-reflection thing, right?
Yeah.
And they're being, yeah. Huh, interesting.
Uh, but at any rate, you come. Do you have face-to-face meetings with them, or is this all on paper?
So no, so let me just say I'm an administrator now, so I don't teach on a regular basis, but when I was teaching regularly, it was mostly in person. Um, and I had one course over the year that I would teach in a hybrid fashion, meaning we met in class one day, and then the next day was the following day was online activities and assignments and things that they had to do. So I actually prefer, I don't mind the online. I'm comfortable navigating technology and using breakout rooms and all that kind of stuff in Zoom, but I I prefer in person. It's just, I come from that era, and it's just so there's just a little different in terms of the energy and the connection and things that you can do in person um than that
Okay.
sometimes the online environment poses some challenges to that.
Well, we use the phrase human beings, and somebody once told me we should not use that phrase any longer. We should use human becoming.
Mm.
We're all becoming something other than what we are, and we're trying to be
Um,
something better. Most of us are, at least in our own minds, trying to improve ourselves. So we're all human becoming something a little bit more
I
than
like
what we
it.
were yesterday. Would you
I
agree with
like
that?
it.
Yeah. That's
Yes,
not mine. I
absolutely.
don't know where I heard that, and I heard
Well,
that.
I'm gonna borrow it.
Okay, that's
Thank
fine.
you.
Humans becoming. All right. So thank you, Richmond. I appreciate your time, your insight, your
Absolutely.
wisdom, your expertise, your generosity with your articulate abilities and your demeanor. I can see why students would have liked you.
Thank you.
You make it easy to want to belong. So
Oh,
I really appreciate your time with us this evening,
thank
and
you for having
I
me.
want everybody to remember that nothing in August, but we do have September 22nd. It's a Sunday vernal equinox party, food, drink, and good time. I hope everybody can join us. So look for us. Look for more information on our website and our meetup pages. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Richmond.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. And now that I'm on your list, I'll keep up and you'll see me again.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you
Bye-bye.
all.
Thank you.
And we'll upload this to
Thanks.
our website too.
Okay,
Great
fantastic.
presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Candace. Bye-bye.
All right,
Thank
bye
you.
now.